Salam sejahtera bersama saya Rizal Zulkarpli dan ini Niaga AWANI. Kita mulakan pertama dengan perkembangan pasaran di Asia. Saham di pasaran Asia dijangka meningkat dalam dagangan pada hari ini. Pelabur akan pantau bursa di China yang dibuka selepas cuti Tahun Baru China. Terdahulu saham di bursa Amerika catatkan sedikit kejatuhan dengan pelabur jual saham teknologi. Dalam masa yang sama, sentimen pasaran terkesan dengan pelabur jangka kadar inflasi akan meningkat dengan program vaksinasi yang terus meningkat. Peningkatan vaksin di Amerika akan bantu buka ekonomi yang berdepan pelbagai sekatan sejak setahun lepas. Hasil untuk bond 10 tahun Amerika meningkat ke paras tertinggi dan dolar turut dilapor meningkat dengan prospek pemulihan ekonomi. Menurut laporan Reuters, data menunjukkan jualan runcit di Amerika meningkat pada Januari selepas isi rumah terima bantuan tunai daripada kerajaan. Data lain menunjukkan harga pengeluar di pintu kilang turut catat peningkatan besar sejak 2009. Dalam minit mesyuarat yang dikeluarkan The Fed, ia komited untuk kekalkan kadar faedah sehingga kadar inflasi meningkat lepasi paras 2% untuk satu tempoh. Namun pelabur gusar bantuan $1.9 trilion yang diumumkan Biden akan mempercepatkan peningkatan kadar inflasi tersebut. Bantuan berkenaan akan turut merangkumi cek $1,400 kepada individu dan isi rumah. Mereka gusar jika ini berlaku, The Fed akan meningkatkan kadar faedah dalam masa terdekat. Pada penutup, indeks Dow Jones naik 90 mata, indeks S&P 500 jatuh 1.26 mata dan Nasdaq jatuh 82 mata. Sementara itu, nilai Bitcoin dilapor meningkat lepasi paras $52,000 seunit. Harga minyak mentah meningkat $1 setong selepas ribut salji yang melanda Texas menyukarkan proses pengeluaran. Semakan terakhir menunjukkan harga minyak ditutup pada paras $64 setong. Dan untuk mengetahui apakah faktor yang mempengaruhi pasaran pada hari-hari akan datang dan juga bagaimana ringgit akan didagangkan melihat kepada peningkatan harga minyak, kita bersama dengan Jamil Ahmad, pengarah strategi pelaburan Naga Group AG. Saksikan rakaman temu bual saya bersama dengan Jamil Ahmad. Jamil, thank you for joining us. Now, Jamil, stocks in Asia Pacific traded mixed earlier today. Investors monitored bond yields following a recent rise. The benchmark 10-year Treasury rose to around 1.29%. Tell us more about this fear that inflation could increase in the US.
So essentially what's happening is there's so much stimulus and central bank support that's within the world economies now. But if we look at the US specifically, you've got $1.9 trillion of stimulus that the new president wants to provide, and that's going to be waiting in Congress and Senate to pass through over the coming days. And there's a fear that following what has been close to a year now of depressed demand, where people have not been able to go out, they haven't been able to conduct normal activities, go to restaurants, hospitality, and so on. We've all been confined to lockdowns in some way, shape, and form. That once economies reopen, travel becomes more popular once again, and basically we get back to life as we used to know it. There are fears that inflation will pick up, and that's only natural. So that's why I'm not so fearful of that, because that would be a natural element of what should be the course of the global economic recovery. Because for as much as inflation could rise once things get back to normal, we have to also accept that over the past 1 year, prices and inflation has been depressed because of a lack of economic activity. So I think that what the fear is, and that's driving the dollar somewhat higher, is that inflation will go up. That looks like it's going to happen. Nonetheless, we are living in a different world now where central banks and authorities will not be so worried about inflation. Their concerns will be trying to keep infections down, even following vaccines, trying to reopen economies, as well as trying to improve job prospects and economic activity. So I think the priorities from central banks will be completely different than what we used to know it from just 2 to 5 years ago, which was inflation being a key benchmark.
This fear is unfounded, do you think?
It's not completely unfounded. It's just something that's not a tier one fear. I think that all of the concerns that we can have about the global economy right now, economic recoveries, trying to get back to where we were at the beginning of 2020 in terms of headline growth, that's a key factor. Trying to restore employment potential, that's another key element. Then consumer confidence, sentiment, and consumer spending. I would say that out of all the risks to financial market and economic stability right now, including global trade, that inflation's perhaps in the lower 10, 5 to 10, but there's some very key risks that has to be fixed first. And that's why I'm not so concerned about it. And actually, inflation can lead to economic demand and growth. So it could be seen as a positive as long as it's not let get completely out of control.
And we're waiting for two key announcements, the U.S. retail sales for January and the FOMC minutes. How will these two announcements guide markets in the next few days?
Both are considered as tier one economic releases. First, the FOMC minutes is going to be the headline minutes from the most recent US central bank decision. So we're going to see what policymakers really discuss. We know they left policy unchanged, but are they concerned about inflation? We don't know that yet. So perhaps the minutes will provide some sort of guidance on that or what there are concerns about right now. But really, consumer confidence and consumer sentiment is such a key ingredient of the US economy. It's towards 70% of overall GDP, that those retail sales figures could really provide a key guideline towards, one, how the US economy is really performing. That has global implications too. And secondly, how the US economy has performed at the beginning of 2021, where we haven't had that much data yet to show that.
And currently, vaccines rollout are underway in many countries or many economies. Is this enough to provide and sustain positive sentiments in the market?
It is. However, I think there's always room for improvement. I think that you look at the European Union and they've had a really terrible and structurally weak rollout so far, where they're very much behind the curve, and so are some other countries too, because they haven't got access to the vaccine. So I think that yes, there has been some good groundwork put in, but there's always room for improvement, and the room for improvement will be the accessibility to the vaccines, getting those vaccines out there to more third and emerging market countries too. And then I still think there would be more optimism that can come from those key factors, because at the moment there are several economies that seem to be making very good progress. United Kingdom is one of them, but we shouldn't forget that those same economies were hit very hard from this pandemic too. And yet there are some regions, like the African region as one example, that has not had anywhere near the volume of vaccines delivered to them as some other counterparts have.
So do you believe the recovery could be uneven between the richer and the poorer countries?
Sadly, yes.
And Jamil, let's talk about Bitcoin. Bitcoin continued to climb today and has surged above the $51,000 mark. What's the basis for this increase? Is this because BNY Mellon, Tesla, BlackRock, and also MasterCard have recognized Bitcoin?
That is the headline factor. The more that the mainstream and these very significant companies show a welcoming or some sort of encounter into accepting the technology behind Bitcoin and specifically using it as a payment method, the more that price appreciates. But now that we've hit that magic number in 50, it's only a matter of time before everybody talks about $100,000. But I think that 50 was such a key milestone. We've had about a $20,000 rise in overall Bitcoin price, which is somewhere around 40% of its total value over the past 2 months or so. So I think we should study on course that it could go all the way to 100K. And I think that 50K is a very key and critical benchmark that Bitcoin has to be able to sustain before we can talk about higher numbers.
Speaking of sustaining that, will this recognition by these companies give cryptocurrency the fundamentals needed for it to sustain that highs?
To sustain those highs, not necessarily, because we have to remember that what we're seeing in the price is speculation, buying and selling, like we see on other financial market instruments, whether that's gold or stock markets or currencies and so on. But what I would say is that this adoption shows huge levels of improved legitimacy and accepting that Bitcoin does have a role to play in financial society. Whether that will continue to be enough to improve the speculation on its price, and again, it's the price which is the headline factor in the news right now, that remains to be seen. But I do believe that the more the mainstream accepts it, the more acceptance it will have around the general consensus, and the more good that the technology behind it can do to the world.
And tell us more about the increase in crude oil prices, and has ringgit benefited from this rise?
Actually, when it comes to the ringgit, we could be doing the same question over the past couple of weeks, and the currency's pretty much ranged. It's still ranging between 402 and 404. We haven't seen any big shifts in either direction, generally of the medium term. What we're seeing, though, is a stronger dollar because of these inflation fears. So that's weakened the ringgit somewhat over the past couple of sessions. Nonetheless, it's not fallen below that 405 mark for some time now. Crude oil story, it's going to be much better for the Malaysian revenues and those government buffers. we have to also look into the fundamentals here that markets are getting very excited that we are going to reopen sooner rather than later, which is improving demand for oil. Hence, we're seeing better price prospects. But at the same time, we've got increase in Middle East tension, specifically with Saudi Arabia and Iran and the Yemen situation that was following this weekend. We also have indications of what is a very severe weather spell that is approaching the United States, and the United States states like Texas and so on are going through. We have to also consider that Texas and that region of the United States are huge contributors towards domestic supplies of oil, and because those supplies look like they're going to be cut off for some time, that's also improving the price prospects.
Let's take those two factors out: the cold snap in Texas and also the geopolitical tension. How much could oil retract if we take out those two factors?
Retract, I think that $60 is going to be an optimum level. If we can stay at 60, I think that's a level we can range at for some time in 2021. A potential road back towards 55 is not out of the question, but I think we've got so much good news on the vaccines that we shouldn't see an oil price go below 55 unless we have some very unfortunate news like new variants or vaccines not working across certain variants and so on. But generally speaking, I think that oil prices, if they can go towards 65 before the summer, we might see $70 before the end of 2021. But I think it's very much a steady goes the ship message. We've had an oil price that's improved significantly over the past 3 to 5 months, is somewhat like 45%. And as long as we can sustain a gradual path higher, that would be a good thing. But we shouldn't be shooting any higher than $70 anytime soon.
On that note, we thank you very much, Jamil, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.